How the first primates actually became the Ice Age giants' neighbors, the complete story of human evolution during the Pleistocene. 7 million years back, in the heart of Africa, something fell from a branch. It didn't die, no retractable claws, no poison, no fangs worth mentioning, lighter than a large dog, slower than almost everything trying to eat it. On paper, an evolutionary accident. Yet this creature's descendants would one day grip a hammer, strike flint, paint cave walls, hunt woolly mammoths across sheets of ice a mile thick. Here's what I'm about to show you. Humans didn't become the Ice Age's apex hunters because they were strong or fast or specially built for cold. They became neighbors to the giants through a chain of choices, accidents really, that started millions of years before the first human ever breathed glacial air. And the secret behind why our branch of the primate tree survived while thousands of others vanished, you'll understand that completely by the end of this video. Stay with me. If you've ever wondered how a small, defenseless ape became the predator that mammoths feared, drop a comment telling me which Ice Age giant scares you most. I read every single one, and please subscribe so you don't miss when we unpack the next titan of the Pleistocene. Hold on, I need to grab your attention for a second, because the details of what you're about to learn are the skeleton key to everything that follows. The complete step-by-step mechanism of how primates shape themselves into humans and how humans learn to hunt the megafauna of North America is explored in our full in-depth guide available in the description and pinned to the comments. That guide walks you through the evolutionary pressures, the anatomical signals, and the behavioral breakthroughs that textbooks usually gloss over. This is a paid resource, but it's the reference I built specifically so you'd understand these connections on a level documentaries don't usually reach. Now, let's talk about the real starting point. 55 million years ago, the world was tropics. Rainforests stretched across continents. Africa, Asia, Europe, all of it warm, wet, green. Within those forests lived small mammals that nobody would have recognized as anything special. Most were nocturnal. Most ate insects and seeds. Most had eyes that reflected light like marbles because they hunted in darkness. These were the primates' ancestors, though calling them primates is generous. They were experimenting. Some developed forward-facing eyes. Not for beauty, for precision. A creature leaping through branches in darkness needs to know exactly where its next handhold will be. Binocular vision, even in those tiny skulls, gave that information. Eyes that overlap, that calculate depth, that don't miss the difference between a solid branch and a fatal gap. Other primates developed prehensile fingers, thumbs that could work against the other four, not for fighting, for gripping fruit, for stripping seeds, for climbing with control rather than desperation. These weren't hands built for combat. They were built for precision, for feeling, for knowing. Over millions of years, something strange happened in the primate lineage. The brain, specifically the visual cortex, and the areas that controlled fine motor movement, began to expand. A lot. Not because larger brains were inherently better, but because a primate that could see clearly and move its fingers with exactness survived more predators, survived more falls, caught more insects, found food faster. Every advantage stacked. Every small mutation that made vision sharper or hands steadier got passed forward. This wasn't a march toward intelligence. It was a march toward survival in a specific place, up in trees where failure meant death. By 35 million years before present, the primate tree had branched badly. Monkeys evolved, apes evolved. Some stayed small and nocturnal, others grew larger and began hunting during the day. Social structures emerged, groups forming, mothers carrying young, infants learning by watching, not by instinct alone. Here's what matters. Teaching was beginning. Not language, not conscious instruction, but a young ape watching an older ape extract termites from a log with a stick and understanding that the stick was useful, that certain tools worked, that intelligence meant borrowing techniques from others instead of rediscovering fire every generation. The climate shifted. It always does. African rainforest gave way to woodland. Woodland thinned into savanna. Trees that once formed dense corridors became islands, separated by grass and stone. A primate living in that new world faced a problem. The canopy was gone. Those that stayed small, most didn't survive the transition. Those that grew larger, that developed muscles for long-distance walking, that could see over grass to spot predators, those lineages persisted. Standing upright wasn't an advantage because it made you stronger. It made you visible. It let you see what was coming. It freed your hands to carry things, to throw, to fight while moving. One lineage, our lineage, faced something else entirely. 2 million years later, that difference would matter catastrophically. For the first time in primate history, our ancestors were exposed, vulnerable, out in the open where every carnivore on the continent could see them. Speed alone wouldn't save them. A lion runs 80 kilometers an hour. A hyena pack moves faster than any bipedal ape could manage. Raw strength? A saber-toothed cat weighs 3 times what a human weighs and kills with precision. The savannah in those days wasn't a gentle place for a creature built for climbing. So what kept us alive? We were persistent, not fast, not strong, persistent. A human can walk for hours under the African sun, while most predators pant in the shade. We can track prey by following footprints, by reading spilled blood on stone, by understanding patterns in movement. We sweat. That sounds mundane until you realize almost nothing else does. We regulate temperature through our skin rather than seeking water or shelter. That gave us an edge nothing else had: endurance. Between 3 and 2 million years ago, our brains began changing, not growing larger all at once. That's a common misconception. The expansion was gradual, almost unremarkable year to year, but over generations it accumulated. The prefrontal cortex expanded, the temporal lobes developed more complexity, we could hold more information in working memory, we could imagine consequences before acting, we could plan. That might sound obvious now. For every other animal on Earth, it wasn't an option. 2 million years ago, in what's now Ethiopia, someone picked up a rock and fractured it deliberately. Not by accident, not in anger. The angle was too precise. The edges were sharp. Someone had thought about what a rock could become and then made it become that thing. That's a stone tool. The oldest one we've found dates to exactly this moment, give or take 100,000 years, which in geological time is precision enough. The tool changed everything, but not immediately, not in any way that would have been obvious at the moment it was made. Those first tools were crude. They couldn't fell a mammoth, they couldn't kill a saber-toothed cat, but they could process carcasses. When a lion made a kill and then moved on, our ancestors could move in quickly, break open the bones and extract the marrow, calories that would have taken hours to access with teeth alone. We could butcher meat efficiently. We could supplement a diet of gathered plants with protein from scavenged kills. Scavenging sounds passive. It wasn't. It required timing. It required reading the landscape for circling vultures. It required speed and coordination and the willingness to approach something that could kill you while you worked. A single saber-toothed cat returning to its kill could end your life in seconds. There were trade-offs: risk against nutrition, death against survival. Hold on, I need to pull back for a moment here. The story of how humans became neighbors to the Pleistocene giants isn't really a story about getting stronger or smarter, not in the way we usually think about those words. It's a story about becoming something that could exist in a world ruled by creatures that outweighed us 10 to 1. The complete mechanisms of how that transformation happened, the cognitive shifts, the social developments, the hunting strategies that would eventually let humans thrive alongside mammoths and dire wolves, all of that is explained in tremendous depth in our full ebook guide, available in the description and pinned in the comments. It's a paid resource, but if you really want to understand the signals and turning points in human evolution during the Pleistocene, that guide walks through them systematically. Worth your time if this topic grabs you. By 1.5 million years ago, our ancestors had spread out of Africa. They moved north into the Mediterranean, they reached the Middle East, they eventually made their way into what would become Europe and Asia. Each migration took thousands of years, each required adaptation to new climates, new prey, new predators. In Africa, you were competing with lions and hyenas for kills. In Ice Age Europe, you were moving into territory already dominated by something far more organized. Packs of dire wolves that could coordinate hunts with intelligence that rivaled your own. Saber-toothed cats that hunted in family groups, ground sloths taller than houses, mammoths that weighed as much as 6 elephants and traveled in herds you could never outrun or outfight. These weren't obstacles to human success, they were the defining pressure that shaped it. Your survival in these new lands wasn't about being faster or stronger than the Ice Age megafauna. It was about understanding them in ways no other predator could. A dire wolf pack hunted by instinct honed over hundreds of thousands of years. Your ancestors hunted by asking questions. Why did that mammoth turn here? What does that ground sloth behavior tell us about where the herd is heading? How do we use the terrain to our advantage when we're outnumbered and outmuscled? This shift from pure physical competition to intellectual prediction changed everything. Around 800,000 years ago, fire became a routine tool rather than a rare accident. Your ancestors didn't invent fire. Lightning and volcanic activity had produced it for millions of years, but they learned to carry it, control it, and use it as a multiplier. Fire scared predators away from kill sites. It made meat digestible, releasing nutrients locked away in raw muscle. It extended the daylight hours, which meant more time to work, plan, and teach. It turned caves from shelter into workshops. With fire came cooking, and cooking was a revolution. The mammoth meat that had required hours of chewing raw could now be softened, made safer, made more efficiently nourishing. A dire wolf pack needed to hunt nearly every day to feed their metabolic demands. Your ancestors, eating cooked food, could hunt less frequently and invest more time in everything else. In making better tools, in planning hunts that required cooperation across larger groups, in survival itself. But here's something that still strikes me as remarkable. Even with all these advantages, you were nowhere near dominant. The Ice Age giants still set the rules. The megafauna still controlled which lands could sustain human populations and which couldn't. You were successful because you'd learned to fit into their world, not replace it. That's where most people get the story wrong. Humans didn't conquer the Pleistocene. We negotiated with it. 600,000 years ago, your ancestors had spread across much of the Old World, Africa, Europe, Asia, but their populations were never large. Estimates suggest perhaps a few 100,000 humans existed across the entire planet. Compare that to the mammoth herds that numbered in the tens of millions, to the dire wolf packs that hunted nearly every ecosystem from the Atlantic to the Pacific, to the massive ground sloths that moved through the forests and grasslands like mobile mountains, each one weighing as much as 30 humans combined. You weren't neighbors with the Ice Age giants. You were guests in their house, tolerated and occasionally preyed upon. Then, roughly between 300,000 and 150,000 years ago, something shifted in your brain. The archaeological record becomes harder to read, but the evidence suggests changes in language, in symbolic thinking, in the ability to imagine futures that hadn't happened yet. Your ability to plan not just the next hunt, but hunts seasons from now. To tell stories about dangers you'd never personally encountered. To pass knowledge across generations with precision. Before we go deeper, I want to make sure you understand something critical about what's coming next. The pattern I'm describing, how human intelligence evolved specifically in response to megafauna pressure, that's the foundation for everything that follows. And if you want the complete mechanisms behind how humans went from prey avoidant scavengers to apex hunters, how the relationship between people and Ice Age giants actually functioned, the full guide to this entire period is available in the description and pinned in the top comment. That resource walks through the behavioral signals, the hunting innovations, the climate pressures, the whole system. It's worth going deeper on this one. The saber-toothed cats and dire wolves were apex predators, no question. They'd held that position for millions of years, but they hunted as their bodies allowed them to hunt. A saber-tooth was built for ambush and power, tremendous strength, those massive canines, short bursts of explosive speed. It was lethal at close range but exhausted quickly. A dire wolf was built for endurance and cooperation, could chase prey across miles, could coordinate with pack members using vocalizations and body signals. You were built for nothing specific, which meant you could do anything. Your ancestors couldn't outrun a mammoth. They couldn't match a dire wolf's sense of smell or a saber-tooth's raw power. But they could think about the mammoth's behavior differently than any predator had before. They could use the landscape. They could set traps. They could drive herds toward cliffs or into swamps. They could follow prey for days, understanding that exhaustion would eventually win against instinct. This was the critical transition, from being hunted by the giants to being a peer predator that the giants had to account for. Somewhere between 200,000 and 100,000 years ago, something shifted in how your ancestors moved through the world. They weren't faster or stronger. They weren't developing new teeth or claws. What changed was subtler and infinitely more dangerous to every large animal sharing that landscape with them. They started planning hunts that would take days. They began coordinating with other groups they weren't related to. They carved symbols onto bone that had nothing to do with cutting or scraping, marks that seemed to serve no purpose except to exist. Your ancestors were crossing a threshold from reactive survival into something resembling strategy, into information storage and transmission, into culture. And the mammoths knew something was wrong. The fossil record from this period shows something remarkable in the bones of megafauna. Wound patterns that don't match the hunt styles of the apex carnivores that had been killing them for millennia. Coordinated injuries suggesting multiple attackers working on the same animal, signs of bleeding out rather than being brought down by crushing bite force. The dire wolves and saber-tooths continued hunting as they always had, but now they competed with a third predator that didn't play by the old rules. Humans began to specialize. Not genetically, your body hadn't changed much in 50,000 years. You specialized culturally. Some groups became exceptionally skilled at hunting woolly mammoths specifically. Others developed techniques for trapping ground sloths in deadfall traps or driving them into kill zones. Your ancestors in different regions solved the same problem: how to take down an animal hundreds of times your size in dozens of different ways. And each solution was preserved not in genes, but in knowledge passed from one person to another around fires, in repetition, in demonstration. The mammoths adapted in response. They changed migration patterns. They altered herd composition. Genetic studies of mammoth populations in the late Pleistocene show reduced genetic diversity in some regions, suggesting that successful hunts were selective, targeting certain families, certain lineages. The mammoths were being edited by human predation. Listen, this part is crucial for understanding what comes next, and I need you to focus on it for a moment. The same adaptive pressure that shaped every predator in this ecosystem was now being applied by the most unpredictable, most flexible hunter that had ever existed. Your ancestors weren't just a new apex predator. They were a predator that could invent new hunting methods in real time. A predator that could share knowledge between groups separated by hundreds of miles. A predator that didn't need to physically mature before becoming lethal. They could inherit sophisticated weapons and tactics the moment they were old enough to understand language. And if you want to understand how this ultimately transformed the entire Pleistocene megafauna ecosystem, the complete dynamics of competition, extinction pressure, and environmental collapse during this period, Before we go any further, grab the full guide from the description or the pinned comment below. It maps out every mechanism of megafauna decline across North America in detail, something I can only touch on here. That resource goes deep into the patterns that determined which species survived and which disappeared. The dire wolves were apex predators for a reason. They'd held that position for nearly 1 million years, but they hunted through metabolic expenditure. They needed to kill regularly or starve. Your ancestors hunted through planning. They could kill an animal weighing 5 tons, preserve the meat for weeks, feed 30 people for months. They could afford to wait. They could afford to fail. Dire wolves could not. Competition intensified gradually. Early human populations were small, scattered. Their impact on megafauna populations was measurable but not yet catastrophic. But as human populations grew, not explosively, but persistently, as they spread into new territories and refined their hunting techniques, the pressure accumulated. A mammoth family that avoided human hunters in one valley might encounter them in the next. A dire wolf pack that had dominated a river basin for generations suddenly found themselves competing with coordinated human groups that could anticipate their movements. By 80,000 years ago, your ancestors were doing something no other predator had done. They were innovating weapons systems. Atlatls appeared in Africa and later spread globally. Spear throwers that multiplied the force of a thrown projectile, extending the lethal range of hunting far beyond what hand-throw accuracy alone could achieve. These weren't crude, they were engineered. They required precise balance, specific wood densities, careful binding. Someone invented them. Someone refined them. Someone else improved them further. The mammoths couldn't invent weapons. The saber-tooths couldn't coordinate hunts across territorial boundaries. The dire wolves couldn't teach their young strategies that their parents had never experienced. Your ancestors could do all of that, and they did. This technological leap wasn't some accident of evolution. It was deliberate problem-solving, refined across generations. By 70,000 years ago, humans were fashioning tools from bone and ivory, materials that required understanding how to work with resources no other predator bothered using. A mammoth's tusk could be carved, shaped, turned into harpoon heads, fish hooks, needles for sewing clothing. That last detail matters. Clothing, stitched, fitted garments extended human range into climates where naked skin meant death within hours. The megafauna didn't need tailors. They grew their own insulation. Woolly mammoths had dense undercoats and outer guard hairs that could shed water. Saber-tooths had thick pelts. Giant ground sloths relied on their massive bulk to retain heat. Humans had to engineer survival. Every improvement in tool technology, every refinement in hunting strategy, every innovation in shelter design, these were choices, accumulated knowledge, culture in the strictest sense. 50,000 years ago, your ancestors began migrating out of Africa in waves. Some moved north into Europe. Others pushed east into Central Asia. A smaller group, perhaps 3,000 to 5,000 people, ventured toward the coast of Southeast Asia and somehow, the archaeology here is still fragmentary, crossed open water to reach Australia. No other land mammal had done this. The journey required boats or rafts. The journey required navigation. The journey required the ability to imagine a destination you couldn't see and the confidence that your people could survive the crossing. From Southeast Asia, other populations pressed northward into what would become Siberia and beyond. The timing of this expansion is debated, but genetic evidence suggests that humans were present in Beringia, that vast land bridge connecting modern Russia to Alaska, sometime between 45,000 and 30,000 years ago. They didn't stay there. The archaeological record shows humans in North America by at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier. Some researchers argue for 30,000 or even 40,000, though that remains controversial. Hold on, I need you to focus here for a moment, because this is where the story accelerates toward its conclusion. The complete in-depth breakdown of how human migration patterns, climate cycles, and megafauna extinction intersect is covered in my full guide, available in the description and pinned to the top of the comments. It's a paid resource where I walk through the extinction timeline, the hunting pressure signatures in the fossil record, and the competing theories about which megafauna succumbed to climate versus human predation. That guide exists so you can understand not just what happened, but the evidence, the debates, and the remaining mysteries. What matters for this narrative is what happened when those first human populations encountered the megafauna of the Americas. When they arrived, the landscape was a biological museum that hadn't seen human hunters before. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, massive beavers, camels that hadn't yet gone extinct on the continent where they originated. Horses, yes, horses had evolved in North America and still lived there until roughly 10,000 years ago. Direwolves, saber-tooths, short-faced bears that weighed 800 to 900 kilograms. These animals had never evolved defenses against human hunting. They didn't panic at human scent. They hadn't learned to avoid coordinated groups with projectile weapons. In Africa and Eurasia, megafauna had been co-evolving with human hunters for hundreds of thousands of years. There was a balance, uneasy perhaps, but established. In the Americas, there was no balance. There was only sudden, novel predation pressure applied to prey animals with no learned response. The extinction of North America's megafauna happened between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago. Most of the largest animals vanished in a compressed window around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. Mammoths lasted slightly longer in isolated populations on Arctic islands, clinging to survival until roughly 4,000 years ago. But on the mainland, in the vast grasslands and forests where they'd thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, they were gone within 2 millennia of intensive human hunting. 47 genera of large mammals disappeared. 47. That's not just mammoths and mastodons. That's the entire ecosystem reorganized. The horses went, the camels went, the ground sloths vanished, the direwolves, the saber-tooths, the bears, all extinct on the mainland. The megafauna that had shaped the landscape for millions of years, that had determined which plants could grow and which couldn't, that had structured the entire food web, that entire world collapsed in the span of a few thousand years. And here's the thing that still matters today. Your ancestors did this. Not your ancestors in the sense of blame or judgment, but in the straightforward historical fact that human innovation, human coordination, human technological advancement directly caused the transformation of an entire continent's ecosystem. We're talking about a process that unfolded over 1,000 years or less, across 3 million square miles of territory. That's unprecedented. No predator in Earth's history had ever reshaped a continental ecosystem that rapidly. Human brains hadn't evolved larger in the past 50,000 years. Spear throwers were clever engineering, but they weren't high technology in the modern sense. What changed was cultural momentum. Knowledge accumulated. Techniques spread. A successful hunting strategy in one valley was shared, adapted, improved upon. Within a few generations, an innovation could spread across hundreds of miles. Human ingenuity, human communication, human ability to learn from experience and pass that learning forward, those were the novel forces in the American landscape. And so we arrive at the revelation I promised you at the beginning. This is the secret that ties together everything we've traced across the past 7 million years. The first primates didn't just survive in the forests of Africa. They didn't just adapt to open grasslands. They didn't just develop larger brains or better tools. What they actually did, what we actually did, was become the first species on Earth capable of altering an entire continent's ecosystem faster than the climate itself. Not through size, not through physical strength, through knowledge transfer across generations. The mammoths and giant ground sloths didn't vanish because of a single catastrophe. They vanished because a species emerged that could accumulate information faster than any ecosystem could adapt to losing its largest herbivores. Every successful hunt taught a lesson. Every failed hunt taught another. Every spear design that worked better was copied, refined, shared. That knowledge didn't die with individuals. It persisted in the group. It spread to neighboring groups. It became culture. Consider what this means. A saber-toothed cat's offspring inherited its parents' instincts, but not its experience. A young dire wolf learned to hunt by watching, by doing, but that knowledge was largely individual. Human children inherited not just genes, they inherited stories. They inherited techniques. They inherited accumulated trial and error that their ancestors had collected over thousands of years. That compounding effect is what turned humans from just another apex predator into something qualitatively different. The extinction of the megafauna wasn't an accident. It wasn't an asteroid or a sudden ice age or a disease. It was the consequence of a species that had learned to hunt cooperatively, to communicate complex strategies, to improve those strategies deliberately, and to pass those improvements down. That's the real story. Not dominance through power, but dominance through innovation. And here's what still strikes me about this process. It happened in a blink. From a geological perspective, the megafauna vanished almost instantly. 13,000 years is nothing. It's a single breath in Earth's history. But biologically and culturally, it represents the moment when human beings stopped being subject to the same evolutionary pressures as every other animal. We didn't wait for our bodies to adapt to new prey. We adapted our technology. We adapted our strategies. We adapted our culture. We outpaced evolution itself. The primates that fell out of African trees 7 million years ago carried within them the capacity for something the world had never seen before. Not bigger teeth, not stronger claws, not faster legs. The capacity to ask why something failed and to try a different approach next time. The capacity to say to another person, "This worked for me, and here's how I did it." The capacity to build on the achievements of the dead and the discoveries of strangers. That's what made the difference. That's what turned a small, slow, weak ape into the creature that reshaped continents. The megafauna didn't disappear because they were weak. They disappeared because they met a species that could learn faster than they could breed, innovate faster than they could adapt, and teach faster than they could evolve. Every human child born in the last ice age inherited not just the genes of its parents, but the accumulated hunting knowledge of its entire lineage. The mammoths and mastodons had no answer to that. No predator in the Pleistocene did. So here's what I want you to take away from this. The story of human beings isn't really about our muscles or our teeth or even our brains alone. It's about our ability to accumulate, to share, to improve. That's the tool that actually shaped the world. That's the weapon that won: culture, knowledge, the willingness to learn from the past and build toward the future. Ask yourself this week, what knowledge are you passing forward? What have you learned that someone else needs to know? Because in a very real sense, you're still participating in the same process that began when the first humans looked at a failed hunt and asked themselves how to do better next time. Thank you for watching. If you found yourself drawn into the world of the Pleistocene and the creatures that shaped it, please subscribe to Ice Age Titans. Leave a comment below and tell me which of these giants fascinates you most: the mammoths, the saber-tooths, the dire wolves, or something else entirely. And tap that notification bell so you're never left behind when we explore the next chapter of Ice Age history.